I was born and raised in a place where the word small felt like an understatement. Our town was a dot on the map, a place you'd miss if you blinked while driving through. My parents were the hard-working sort, the kind who woke up before dawn and didn't hit the sack until the stars were high in the sky. Despite their backbreaking work, the dream of sending me off to university remained just that, a dream. Growing up, I learned the value of $1 and the weight of hard work. By the time I was old enough to work, I was more than ready to roll up my sleeves. My first job was slinging hash at the local diner, a greasy spoon that saw more locals than it did out-of-towners. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and it paid the bills, or at least some of them. Anna, table 4 needs a refill on their coffee, and don't forget, the Hendersons like their pie with extra whipped cream. My boss, a stout man with a voice that could carry across the diner without the slightest effort, would often bellow. "Yes, sir," I'd reply, hustling over with the coffee pot in one hand and balancing a slice of pie in the other. The regulars were like clockwork, with their predictable orders and familiar faces. It was comforting, in a way, to know exactly what each day would bring. As time went by, I climbed the ranks from waitress to administrator, a title that sounded fancy but really meant I was juggling more responsibilities for slightly better pay. The diner became my second home, and the people there, my second family. Then, at 25, my life took a turn I never saw coming. I met Michael at the diner, of all places. He was unlike anyone I'd ever met, polished, educated, and with manners so fine they could have been straight out of a book. He stumbled into our little establishment one rainy afternoon, looking like he'd taken a wrong turn and ended up miles from where he meant to be. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice soft and hesitant. "Could I trouble you for a cup of coffee? And maybe some directions?" I couldn't help but smile. "Sure thing, sugar. Take a seat anywhere you like, and I'll be right with you." That cup of coffee turned into hours of conversation, and before I knew it, I was falling head over heels for this shy, awkward man who seemed to find solace in our quaint little diner. Michael worked for a consulting firm, a job that sounded as foreign to me as if he'd said he was an astronaut. He talked about his work with a passion that was infectious, and I found myself hanging on his every word. One day, fed up with his shyness and sensing he felt the same way about me, I took the plunge. "Michael, why don't we make this official? You and me, an item," I blurted out, my heart pounding in my chest. He looked at me, his eyes wide with surprise, before a slow smile spread across his face. "I thought you'd never ask," he said. It wasn't long before talk of marriage started to circulate. The ceremony was modest, but I didn't pursue luxury either. We were together, and that's the main thing. After Michael and I tied the knot, I thought the hardest part was behind us. I was dead wrong. If dealing with Mrs. Brown before was like navigating a minefield, living with her as my official mother-in-law was like being in the middle of an active war zone without any armor. It started small. Comments here, a snide remark there. But soon, it was like she had a checklist of everything she could possibly criticize about me, and she was ticking off boxes with glee. One evening, I was in the kitchen, trying to make dinner for Michael and me. I thought cooking his favorite meal would be a nice gesture. Mrs. Brown walked in, her eyes scanning the kitchen like she was looking for something to pounce on. "What on earth are you making? It smells like a garbage dump in here," she sneered, her nose wrinkled in disgust. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my cool. "It's Michael's favorite, spaghetti carbonara," she huffed, peering over my shoulder. "That's not how you make carbonara. You're ruining it. Here, let me show you how it's done." Before I knew it, she had elbowed her way in, taking over the stove. It wasn't just my cooking she had a problem with. Everything I did was under scrutiny. One day, she cornered me as I was cleaning the living room. "Anna, do you even know how to clean properly? Look at this dust. It's like you're not even trying. My son deserves to live in a clean house, not whatever this is," she barked, running her finger along the mantelpiece and showing me the speck of dust she'd found. I bit back a retort, my hands tightening around the dust cloth. I'm doing the best I can, Mrs. Brown. I work too, you know. Her lips twisted into a mocking smile. Oh, I know all about your job. But really, darling, waiting tables is hardly a career. You should be focusing on taking care of Michael, not gallivanting around a restaurant. The worst part wasn't even her words, it was how Michael reacted, or, more accurately, didn't react. He seemed to shrink whenever his mother started in on me, becoming that shy, awkward man I'd first met in the diner, unable to stand up to her. One night, after Mrs. Brown had gone on a tirade about how the dishes weren't washed to her standards, I confronted Michael. Can't you see what she's doing? She's trying to make me look bad, Michael. You have to talk to her, I pleaded, my voice thick with frustration. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'll talk to her, okay? Just, give it some time. She'll come around. But things didn't get better. They got worse. Mrs. Brown's presence in our lives felt like a constant shadow, darkening every moment of happiness we tried to share. She had an opinion on everything, from how much money I was making. A pittance. How can you expect to support a family on that? To how late I stayed at work. A wife should be at home, waiting for her husband, not out and about at all hours. One evening, Michael was on the phone in the kitchen, his voice a murmur. I caught bits and pieces, enough to know he was talking to his mom. I waited for him to finish, curious about their endless topics of conversation. As he hung up, I teased. What's the secret today? World peace, or did you finally decide what color socks to wear tomorrow? He chuckled, a bit uneasy. You know, just the usual. Mom's worried about the Henderson project I mentioned last week. She thinks I should handle it differently. I raised an eyebrow. And since when did your mom become a consulting expert? It's not like that, Anna. She cares, you know? She's got a lot of life experience. Sure, but does she have to have a say in every little detail of our lives? I couldn't keep the frustration out of my voice. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know it seems like a lot, but she's all I have. We've been through so much together. I wanted to understand, I really did. But there was a difference between being close and being controlled. I decided to let it go, for the moment. A few days later, the reality of their bond slapped me in the face again. We were having dinner, just the two of us, a rarity these days. The conversation was light, the mood almost perfect, until his phone rang. One look at the caller ID, and I knew our peaceful dinner was about to be interrupted. Sorry, I have to take this, Michael said, already standing up. Let me guess, your mom? I couldn't hide my annoyance. He winced. Yeah, she's having trouble with her computer again. I told her I'd help. And it has to be right now? I asked, my voice rising. She's waiting to Skype with her friend. It's important to her, Anna. I watched him go, torn between anger and sadness. This was our life now, me, Michael, and his invisible tether to his mother. Continuing from where we left off, the tension between Michael, his mother, and me found new ground, the topic of children. One evening, feeling a mix of hope and nerves, I brought it up. Michael, I've been thinking, maybe it's time we started talking about having kids. Michael looked at me, his expression unreadable. My mom, she's not happy about the idea, he said, almost apologetically. And since when do we need her approval to start a family? I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. It's not about approval, Anna. She thinks we're not ready, that having kids will distract you from taking care of me and our home. I was flabbergasted. Distract me? Michael, are you seriously telling me you agree with her? He shuffled uncomfortably. I think she has a point. Maybe it is too early for us to think about children. His words felt like a betrayal. It wasn't just his mother's influence anymore, it was him choosing her side over our shared dreams. As I navigated the complexities of my marriage, weighed down by the shadow of my mother-in-law's influence, I realized I needed something for myself, a beacon of independence. That's when the idea of going back to school crept into my mind. Michael didn't mind, but he didn't support me either. He was only interested in how much money I would spend on my studies and how it would affect my employment. The decision to enroll was the easy part. Balancing work, school, and a tumultuous home life was a Herculean task. Nights became a blur of textbooks and diner shifts, with the added spice of Mrs. Brown's ever-watchful eye critiquing my every move. Spending all this time on your studies, neglecting your duties at home. Is that what a good wife does? Mrs. Brown's voice was like a needle, always pricking at my resolve. But I was above that. After years of juggling work and night classes, I finally graduated from university. It felt like a dream when I was offered a position at a top restaurant chain. The job was not only a step up for me professionally, but also came with a paycheck that far exceeded anything I had ever earned. I poured my heart and soul into my work, often staying late to ensure everything ran smoothly. This dedication to my career, however, took a toll on my relationship with Michael. One evening, after coming home later than usual, I found Michael lounging on the couch, absorbed in some game on TV. The house was a mess, and there was no sign of dinner. Exhausted, I dropped my bag and said, "Michael, could you help out a bit around here? Maybe start with dinner once in a while?" He barely glanced my way before replying, "Why? You're doing just fine on your own. Besides, I've been helping Mom with her bills and stuff. She needs me." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. Helping your mom? What about us? Our bills are piling up, and you're telling me you're giving your money to her? Michael turned off the TV and faced me, his expression one of defiance. "Yeah, I am. You're making more than enough now. My mom needs my support." I was floored. So, what? I'm supposed to handle everything else on my own while you play mommy's little helper? Don't start, Anna. She's my mom. She needs me, he retorted, his tone final. The conversation spiraled from there. Our finances, once a shared responsibility, became a battleground. Michael stopped contributing to our joint account altogether, insisting that since I earned more, I should bear the financial burden alone. His visits to his mother's house became more frequent, leaving me to fend for myself at home. One night, as I sat alone at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills and takeout containers, I tried again. "Michael, we need to talk. This isn't working. I need you to pitch in, both financially and around the house." He shrugged, indifferent. "I told you, Anna, my mom comes first. You wanted this big job, so deal with the responsibilities that come with it." I was at my wit's end. "Your mom comes first? What about your wife? Remember me?" His response was cold, calculated. "If you're not happy, figure it out. I'm doing what I need to for my mom." The tension at home had reached a boiling point. Michael's constant absences and refusal to contribute had left me feeling more like a single person managing a household than a partner in a marriage. It wasn't just the physical and financial contributions that were lacking, it was the emotional support, the companionship, the partnership that marriage was supposed to be built on. It all came to a head one particularly stressful evening. I had just come back from a long shift, the weight of my day hanging heavily on my shoulders. The house was silent, Michael's presence notably absent yet again. A quick glance at the clock confirmed he was over at his mother's, a fact that stung more with each passing day. I dialed his number, my patience thinning. "Michael, where are you? It's nearly 10 p.m., I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, hey, Anna. I'm at Mom's. Lost track of time," he replied, his voice too casual for my liking. "Lost track of time? Really? Because it seems to me you've lost track of a lot more than that lately," I snapped back, frustration boiling over. "What's that supposed to mean?" he retorted, a defensive edge creeping into his tone. "It means that I'm here trying to keep our lives together while you're off playing dutiful son. It's not fair, Michael. It's not fair to me. I said, the words pouring out. There was a pause, a heavy silence that filled the space between us. "We'll talk when I get home," he said finally, before hanging up. But we didn't talk when he got home. Or the next day. The conversation we needed to have kept being pushed aside, buried under excuses and avoidance. The turning point came unexpectedly. I received a call from my mom, her voice shaky, on the other end of the line. "Anna, it's your dad. He's very ill." I promised her I'd be there as soon as I could. Hanging up, I turned to Michael, expecting some kind of support or understanding. Instead, his reaction left me floored. "Why would you go? You're not a doctor. What can you possibly do?" Michael asked, his tone more accusatory than concerned. I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. "He's my dad, Michael. He's sick. I need to be there, with my family." Michael shook his head, his stubbornness kicking in. "And what about your job? You're just gonna risk it all for an old man on his deathbed?" His words stung, a slap across my face. "How can you even say that? This is my father we're talking about." He was unmoved, his stance rigid. "I forbid you to go. We can't afford for you to lose your job over this." "Forbid me?" I echoed, my anger rising. "You can't forbid me from anything, especially not when it comes to my family." Without waiting for his response, I packed my bags and left. His words echoed in my ears, a bitter reminder of the gap that had grown between us. I drove to my parents' house with a heavy heart, torn between concern for my dad and outrage at Michael's callousness. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits and helping Mom around the house. Dad was seriously ill, and being there for him, being a part of my family when they needed me most, felt right. It was where I needed to be, despite Michael's objections. When I finally returned home, the silence that greeted me was deafening. Michael's belongings were untouched, indicating he hadn't been home since I left. It was clear where he had been spending his time, his mother's house. Another conflict occurred after I returned home tired. There, in our living room, sat my mother-in-law, perched like a queen awaiting an audience. The look on her face told me this wasn't a social visit. My husband was there too, looking like he'd rather be anywhere but here. The tension was thick in the air. "Sit down, we need to talk," my mother-in-law commanded, her voice sharp, cutting through my weariness. I barely managed to suppress a sigh as I took a seat opposite them. I was too tired for whatever this was going to be. "It's about your neglect," she started, each word laced with disapproval. "You've been too caught up with work. This house is falling apart, and my son is being neglected. You need to change your ways, focus on what's important. If not, a divorce might be the only solution." Her words were like a slap in the face, but what stunned me more was my husband's reaction. He just sat there, nodding along to his mother's tirade as if I wasn't even in the room. I turned to him, searching for some sign of support, some hint that he'd stand up for us. But there was nothing. Just that passive acceptance of his mother's words. "You really believe that?" I asked him, my voice tired but laced with disbelief. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mom's got a point, Anna. You've been distant. Something's got to give." I looked from him to his mother, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. Was this really happening? Was I being given an ultimatum by the woman who had done nothing but make my life difficult since day one? And my husband, was he really siding with her over me, over us? I leaned back, my exhaustion momentarily forgotten, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt in months. "You think I'm the problem here? That simplifying my life, quitting my job, and playing house will fix everything?" Neither of them said a word, their silence a loud affirmation of their stance. I shook my head, a weary laugh escaping me. "I'll think about what you've said," I told them, my voice calm, almost detached. They seemed taken aback by my response, probably expecting me to argue or break down. As I excused myself and headed to bed, leaving them in stunned silence, I felt a mix of fear and liberation. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time I was allowing myself to consider walking it on my own terms. But then a terrible thing happened. Dad died, unable to cope with his illness. The days following Dad's funeral were a blur. I went alone because Michael made it clear he wouldn't stand by me, even threatening divorce if I lingered with Mom during this tough time. When I got back, the sight that greeted me was colder than any words Michael had ever spoken. Divorce papers, already signed by him, were laid out on the kitchen table like some twisted welcome home gift. It didn't take me more than a heartbeat to decide. I signed them, feeling a mix of relief and a burning desire to start fresh wash over me. I didn't waste any time. I packed my things, organized Michael's into boxes, and texted him they were waiting for him. "Mom, it's done. I'm moving out," I told her over the phone, my voice steadier than I felt. "Oh, honey. Come stay with me. We'll figure this out together," she offered, her voice a beacon of hope in the storm. But I had a different plan brewing. "Actually, Mom, what do you think about buying a place together? Just us, a new start?" Her pause was brief, the idea taking root. "I think that's the best idea you've had in a long time. Let's do it." And so we did. Mom sold the house she'd inherited, and together we found a place that felt like a promise of better days. It was more spacious than anything I'd imagined, with rooms that whispered of new beginnings and a large living room that seemed to echo with future laughter and conversations. I used the money I'd saved, money that had once been ours but had grown into a testament to my independence. It covered the mortgage, making our new life not just a dream but a comfortable reality. "Our new home," Mom said, her arm around my shoulders as we looked around the empty living room, imagining the life we'd build. "Yeah, our fresh start. Just us, and no looking back," I replied, feeling the truth of my words down to my bones. Living with Mom in our new home, I began to feel the weight of the past lifting off my shoulders. Each morning brought a sense of possibility, a chance to build something new and wholly ours. Our days were filled with the mundane yet comforting tasks of setting up home, interspersed with moments of planning our future. It was a calm evening, just me and Mom enjoying some tea, when suddenly there was a knock at the door. Opening it, I couldn't believe my eyes. There stood my ex-husband Michael and his mom, as if they had any right to show up unannounced. Without waiting for an invitation, they barged in, looking around like they owned the place. Michael's mom, ever the bold one, wasted no time. "We've decided. We're moving in here with you tomorrow," she announced as if it was the most natural decision in the world. I couldn't help it, I burst into laughter. "Move in? Here? This is my house, not a free hotel for lost souls." Michael, trying to sound authoritative, chimed in. "Anna, I'm still your husband. I have a right to live in your house." The laughter that escaped me was half disbelief, half amusement. "Oh, Michael, dear, you're not my husband anymore. Remember those divorce papers you so graciously signed?" The color drained from his face. I thought you wouldn't sign them." "It was just to scare you," he stammered, looking more lost than ever. His mom, catching up to the conversation, turned her wrath towards him. "You fool. Why didn't you talk to me before doing something so stupid?" Watching them argue was like watching a soap opera unfold in my living room. But my patience was wearing thin. "Enough," I said firmly. "I want both of you out of my house and out of my life." But they weren't done yet. Michael's mom, in a last-ditch effort to salvage the situation, made an outrageous offer. "We're willing to forgive you, Anna. Come back to Michael, and we can talk about having a child." The audacity of her offer was the last straw. "Forgive me? For what, exactly?" "It's time for you two to leave. For good." As they realized I wasn't budging, Michael's mom played her final card. "We need money." Michael lost his job, and I couldn't help but laugh again. "You're asking me for money? After everything you've said and done?" "I think not." Finally, I showed them to the door, a wave of relief washing over me as it closed behind them. Turning back to Mom, we shared a look of disbelief before bursting into laughter. "That's the end of that chapter," I said, more to myself than to her. "Good riddance," Mom replied, her smile telling me she was just as relieved. From that day on, our focus was on building our new life, free from the shadows of the past. We made plans to pay off the mortgage on our new home, turning it into a place of joy and peace. As for Michael and his mother, last I heard, they were bouncing from one rental to another, always arguing about money. It was a fitting end for them, I suppose.